I think 70 years ago, 80 years ago, yeah, you could hand somebody a Bible, say, here, believe it, and great. They were like, but this is a very different era. And you see the need for the apologists, I think it has definitely increased, I feel like, over the last several generations, because this is an era that they want to interact with this concept of Christianity with their mind. It has to make sense in their mind. It also has to go along with how they feel things should be. Now, you can't always win that. And I'm not going to change and adapt and modify in order to win a feeling. But the point is that the approach is a bit different. It's less about, well, is this true? And also about, like, what do I want to be true? How do I feel about this? How can this really be backed up evidentially? And you have a society that has framed things where religion is the belief of the unintelligent, or the people who believe in fairy tales, and people who reject religion, they're the smart ones, they're the educated ones. And so now that you've got this dichotomy, people feel like, if I come over to this religious side, that means I'm an idiot. I've left my brain outside. And it's like, actually, these are actually not accurate. There's smart people on both sides here. And it's helping to actually demonstrate that actually there is something to this Christianity thing. Makes people begin to say, maybe I've misunderstood this. Maybe I can give this some further thought. And so, yeah, the generation has changed. The questions have changed. But I think ultimately a lot of the questions are still the same. The meaning of life, suffering, how should we live, and morality, those kind of things are still there. People are just no longer looking for God to give them those answers. They have become their own God, and to define morality, to define meaning, define those things for themselves. And so they in turn have rejected God, replacing him with themselves oftentimes, and being the arbiter of these kind of things.
Yeah. And do you think that because our society is moving further away from God, that people are starting to really question more things? There was a study done in Australia recently, and they found that Gen Z, the youngest people, were actually the ones that were asking the questions about the meaning of life, whereas the further up the age bracket you went, the less they were interested in that type of thing, which is quite encouraging, which means there's this whole new generation who are asking the big questions, but the older ones are sort of like a little bit disillusioned, I guess, and they're kind of not interested. They just want to live their lives and survive. And I guess with Gen Z particularly, the world is such a mess. I mean, I can't imagine having to navigate that. And I guess that's why they do get into the social media. Their friend groups are so important to them now. They basically, I've got a 12-year-old daughter, and she's got a group of, her friend group's 18 girls, and they are constantly in contact with each other. It's quite amazing. And yeah, I just sort of feel like they are asking those questions because of where the world is today. Do you find that in ministry?
Yeah, I absolutely. It's just incredible, the questions that these kids are asking. I mean, Lou and I were speaking at a big conference on missions, and we were kind of helping to run the student branch of that conference. And the questions that were coming in, we have a system we use called Pigeonhole, where students can submit a question and then other students can vote on it. They can like upvote it so it comes to the top. And these questions were deep and raw and visceral. And I mean, these were big life questions about suffering and sexuality and their doubts about God, their doubts about their own faith. And it was interesting because after the first night of this conference, a lot of the student leaders approached the organizer and said, hey, we feel like the speakers were going a little too deep here. Maybe you can ask them to back off a bit. And he said, well, let's just give it another night. By the second night, the student leaders came back to the organizer again and said, never mind, our students are going deeper than they've ever gone before and feel like their questions are finally being answered. They want to go there. And so, I mean, they weren't scared off at all by talking about these big questions. So I think, you know, as Alycia said, all of this is indicative of the fact that we need Christian apologetics. We need a flourishing apologetic endeavor right now, especially for the sake of these young people who have these big life questions.
Absolutely. Lou or Alycia, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, I think Xandra's right. I mean, it's just I think sometimes some of the hardest Q&As come with, honestly, like the 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds, you know, like they'll ask stuff, and I'm like, I've just never even thought about that. Like, or me, I hadn't thought about it since I was 10. But no, I mean, I definitely think that I think over and over again, I think we're encountering people who are saying, I want my questions. I'm looking for somebody to answer my questions, but you can't talk about religion or politics in society and still maintain friends. So I've been afraid to ask about these things. I don't know who to go to.
Yeah.
And then to be able to have somebody who's actually willing to say, okay, I'm interested in this. I actually don't think this younger generation is opposed to the idea of God. I actually don't think that's actually where they're at. I think that that what they've been presented with oftentimes is not compelling. It's not convincing. It's not broad enough to really encounter a lot of the things that they're struggling with, or what they're seeing in their schools, or what's happening in their friendship circles. And so if something is able to get into those avenues, then it's like, okay, this provides me with a more wholesome way to embrace a belief system. But what we can't do is we can't leave it with, yeah, there's a guy named David, and he had a stone and he flung it and it hit Goliath in the head, and he died. Like, people need more than that, and I think that's, sometimes I think as adults, we don't always realize that. But the younger people are looking for deep, hard questions. It's a tough time to grow up in. I mean, this is social, they say about every generation, it's a harder generation, but this one is unique in that there is social media, right? These, the young people now don't know of life outside of Facebook or outside of these social media, cell phone even. There's a lot of young people that don't even remember major events that would have happened in our lifetimes. And so, I mean, they're dealing with things that previous generations haven't had to deal with in the same way, but they still are dealing with the same core kind of thing. So yeah. It's all about going deep in this generation, in this time era.
Absolutely.